If we want to preserve our constitutional republic, we need an informed and educated citizenry. And that's what this show is all about. Find out what's really happening. It's time to stop the lies and learn the truth. This is The Real Story with your host, Jeanne Ives.
Welcome back to The Real Story. It's Jeanne Ives here. And the most alarming story, in my opinion, last week, of course, was Governor Hochul's assistant, one of her top deputies, got arrested as a Chinese spy. Prosecutors charged Linda Sun, a Chinese-born U.S. citizen, with acting as an illegal agent, alleging she went to extraordinary lengths from her perch in state government to aid China in exchange for millions in kickbacks that funded 2 home purchases and a Ferrari. Now, a number of people have written about this, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He wrote in New York Post, he said that for years, I've warned that the Chinese Communist Party has been working to infiltrate America's society and government at every level. The safety and sovereignty of our nation depends on our ability to counter this threat. He goes on to say, while these details may come as a shock to some, this is exactly how the CCP operates. Beijing seeks to influence every level of our society, from the federal government to universities to state senates and even PTA meetings. Well, we know all about that in the state of Illinois. But unfortunately, we also have government officials in the state of Illinois aiding and abetting the Chinese Communist Party by investing in their EV battery plant right there in Montino, about 6 miles from Air National Guard base. And no concern at all. No concern. Here's $500 million to Gotion Incorporated. Welcome to the U.S. and go ahead, take all of our $1 billion in tax subsidies, which, by the way, they are on track to maybe make up to $7.5 billion in tax subsidies if their plant goes through. But here's where we stand now. We've got a Chinese spy. Not the first one, by the way. Remember Dianne Feinstein's driver? Remember Eric Swalwell, congressman from California? Remember his Chinese lover. Remember that they just closed down a few years ago the Houston consulate for its spying operations. This is going on and on and on. And in Illinois, our governor decides to invest in them rather than kick them out. Well, here to discuss this, I am so honored and pleased to have Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. He's lived and worked in China and Hong Kong for almost 2 decades. I'm sure many of my listeners have heard of him and listened to him, and read his writings on China and North Korea have appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Far Eastern Economic Review, the International Herald Tribune, the Weekly Standard, and South China Morning Post. He's appeared on numerous shows, including CNN, Fox News, CNBC, MSNBC. Boy, he's gone into like enemy territory, in my opinion. And he's made the arguments about how China is a huge threat to not just the United States, but the world. And so, Mr. Chang, thank you so much for being here. Could you just start with, are you surprised by Linda Sun just got arrested?
Certainly not surprised by the Linda Sun scandal. Got to remember that the Democratic Party in New York has looked at Chinese Americans as a rich source of voters. And Chinese in New York, especially the city of New York, have these troubling linkages to the Communist Party's United Front Work Department. That's the part of the Chinese Communist Party that works to subvert foreign governments. So this scandal was virtually inevitable. And it means that there are probably other Linda Suns, and there are going to be Linda Sun scandals in the future. So this was a story of naivete on the part of New York's highest elected officials, but it's also a story of Chinese Americans tolerating these linkages. A lot of Chinese Americans, they're loyal, but they always say when a Chinese American is found to be a spy or an operative, this is just racism to look at this. Well, no, it's not, because the Communist Party has weaponized ethnic Chinese, those who are here on just tourist visas, those with green cards, and in Linda Sun's case, U.S. citizens.
Well, okay, so now you've got also the reports that there's upwards of 50,000 Chinese military-aged men who have, illegally crossed the border, and they seem to have been just released into the country as well. I mean, what does that portend for America? What are they doing?
Well, we know that they are doing some very disturbing things. So, for instance, in January of this year, a website Defiant America posted images of Chinese migrants who had been in our country for less than 3 weeks, who came across the border with no money, no documentation, taking target practice with pistols and, in one case, a sniper rifle. And we know that Chinese migrants have been taking target practice in other locations as well. The story here is that if we go back a couple years, the Chinese migrants are coming across our southern border were primarily family groups. In other words, people who look like they just demanded to live in a free society. But now, at least 2/3, and in some border crossings, about 80 to 85% of the Chinese migrants are single males of military age, traveling without family members in packs of 5 to 15. U.S. Border Patrol knows that some of them have links to the Chinese military. And this is occurring at the same time, Jeanne, that we have seen Chinese trying to intrude into our military bases, which looks like preparation for war.
Well, that's something that we're not ready for at all. The Chinese have been building up their military. They have over 500 warships, 150 armed Coast Guard ships, thousands of other smaller armed and trained maritime militia ships. And you can compare this to what we have in the Indo-PACOM area, which is 60 forward ships. That's it. And I got that information straight from Brent Ramsey. He's a retired Navy captain. He's been following this extensively. Not to mention, in terms of like ship building, China in 2022, they had 1,794 large ocean-going ships on order. The U.S. in that same year had 5. I mean, what are we up against here that the American people, again, do not understand? This is a military buildup like none other. And, you know, it doesn't end well for us if we can't combat them ship for ship.
Yes. Xi Jinping has been engaged in the largest and fastest military buildup since the Second World War. He has been trying to sanction-proof his regime. He's stockpiling grain and other commodities. He's firing officers who were opposed to going to war, and he's mobilizing China's civilians for war. In addition to all of this, we have seen, especially in the last couple of months, Xi Jinping takes actions which indicate that he has made the decision to risk war. We don't know if he's actually made the decision to go to war, but he's obviously made the decision to risk war because he's doing that in places like Sabina Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea, where belligerent actions show that this is the hottest flashpoint on Earth where there actually isn't a war yet.
So very interesting because, you know, there's also this, you wrote this article July of just this year. China's having its 2008 financial crisis at the worst possible time. And you go on to talk about their reported 5.2% growth of GDP for 2023. However, other respected analysts say that it's more like 1.5%. Is China economically suffering to the point where this military buildup is the only thing that they can spend their money on? And are they willing to risk everything else in their economic areas just for the military buildup? Is this something we should really be concerned about? Or can we wait them out? Just like we did the Soviet Union. We knew they couldn't economically sustain a military buildup, and sure enough, it collapsed.
Yeah, I don't think that we can wait out the Chinese because it's different. The Soviet leader was Gorbachev, and Gorbachev was a realist, and he understood that the system was unsustainable, and because of those crises, he understood that the Soviet Union must end. Xi Jinping, when he became General Secretary of the Communist Party in November 2012, one of the first things he did, like the month afterwards, he gave a secret speech to Communist Party cadres in Guangdong province. And he criticized Gorbachev for not being, quote unquote, a real man. In other words, someone who would not defend the Soviet system. And Xi Jinping said that they had to protect Chinese communism. And so it's a very different mentality. Now, Xi Jinping is embarking on an economic plan that will inevitably lead to disaster. He has turned his back on consumption, which is the only sustainable path for China's economy. He has doubled down on manufacturing, which means he needs to export to the rest of the world because of their overcapacity problem. it is extremely unlikely that the world will allow China to decimate local industries. The United States won't allow that. The EU won't allow that. And even in the global South, which is Xi Jinping's greatest hope, eventually they won't allow it either, which means that Xi Jinping eventually will be faced with a choice. He'll be faced with the choice of the failure of the Chinese economy and with it the failure of the Communist Party, or he can go to war. And because of his mentality, he is not going to take the end of communism as inevitable. He will go out and kill foreigners because that will be his only path of survival. It may not be a high probability option, but it's better than what he'll perceive to be the zero option, which is not to do anything.
Well, on that dangerous note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with Gordon Chang. There's quite a few more questions I have for him.
The Real Story with Jeanne Ives continues on AM 560. The Answer.
Okay, welcome back to The Real Story. We were right in the middle of a conversation with Mr. Chang about basically Xi Jinping likely taking a military route instead of allowing communism to collapse in that country. Okay, so how dangerous are the next 6 months with Biden in charge?
I think it is a window of vulnerability for us. But it's going to remain dangerous regardless of who is elected on November 5. Right now, if we step back, whatever one thinks of President Trump, he left Joe Biden with a peaceful and stable world. But because of the catastrophic withdrawal of Afghanistan in August 2021 that Biden ordered, Biden opened the world to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin to destabilize it. So we have China, in effect, fighting proxy wars against us. There's one in Ukraine. There is one in the Middle East, the October 7th attack. And China and Russia are fueling insurgencies in North Africa, both above and below the Sahara, that look like wars. So that's essentially 3 proxy wars. And now Xi Jinping looks like he wants to start a war in the South China Sea, a direct war where China will be involved. This couldn't be more dangerous. As I said, we only Xi Jinping knows what's in his mind, but he has embarked on a course of action that in the past had always led to wars. I think that he looks at President Biden as easy pickings. But remember, he's also on a path that even if we have a strong president in the Oval Office, it could still be a world where we end up in war.
So I think everything that you've been talking about, writing about, is also being said now by a number of other folks. And I'm very tight with the people that are fighting against this Gotion plant in Manteno, Illinois. I know this is probably just a niche issue for most people, but it goes to the larger issue of us supplying China with the hard currency that they need and opening up our markets to them to the point where we're basically funding our number one adversary, in my opinion. I mean, they are on track to get billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies to essentially compete against our companies. And it just feels like so many politicians are asleep at the switch. And by the way, when it came to the Manteno decision, it was on both sides of the aisle. Both parties agreed for this massive deal. And they're not the only ones fighting it. Also in Michigan, they're fighting a Gotion plant. Trump and Vance have both spoken out about the Gotion plant at this point. But why is it that people can't understand the threat? What we're hearing from folks arguing for a Gotion plant is that we're xenophobes, that there's nothing to see here. But then you hear from people like Ambassador Sella, who essentially said at a roundtable discussion in Michigan that there are no private companies in the CCP. You see, Gotion wants to claim that they're separated from the CCP, yet he cut the deal with Chen Li, a known member of the Communist Party. I mean, who's right on this?
Yeah, in China's state, no individual, no company can disobey a demand from the Communist Party. And this is a communist party that in May 2019 declared a quote unquote people's war on America. People's war in Communist Party lingo is total war. Now, we're Americans and we think that we have the right to ignore what our enemies say. And we ignored Osama bin Laden, even after he killed 6 Americans at the bombing of the North Tower of the World Trade Center in 1993. We ignored him until one day he killed 2,977 Americans. This is a weakness of generally in democracy. You can go back to Tocqueville and read about this. But the point is, we Americans are refusing to recognize what the Chinese are doing. We should not give our Chinese enemy. They're more than just a competitor. Biden will say, oh, they're just a competitor. They're more than an adversary. They are an enemy. And we're ignoring what they're saying. And we should not give our Chinese enemy the ability to create incentives for other Americans to be disloyal to our country. And as you say, Jeanne, this is a problem not just in the Democratic Party, it's in the Republican Party as well. So we have to cut these links so that people don't have the incentives to be disloyal.
So, look, if China wants to come over here and make trinkets for parades, for example, or a birthday party or whatever they want to do, I mean, whatever. Okay, I can maybe abide by that. But even then, I just really don't want them to own property or set up shop here. But the fact that we're funding them with massive subsidies, it's so galling on every level. So one thing that has been set up is H.R. 6175. This is the No Gotion Act that has been promoted in Congress. And they're supposed to be having China Week next week, where Speaker Johnson and the House Republicans pick up a number of bills related to China. But I just got word yesterday that essentially China Week is going to be weak, as in WEAK, and that the No Gotion Act is not on that list of bills for consideration. And so you have to wonder, are there some corporate interest getting involved? And why is corporate America I'm thinking, forcing the hand with Speaker Johnson to not run a bill like the No Gotion Act?
Yeah. The Republican Party has people who have carried the water for the Communist Party because a number of Republicans are free market and they refuse to take into account national security considerations in what they consider to be market decisions. In addition to that, there are some Republicans who appear to be in it for just personal gain. But I can tell you that in another area, which is China's links with Wall Street, it's a Republican, Patrick McHenry, the congressman from North Carolina, who has almost single-handedly blocked important legislation sponsored by Republicans and President Biden to reduce these links between the Communist Party and our financial services industry. So there are villains on both sides. This is not just a Kathy Hochul problem. This is a problem that cuts across Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, and the American people should be outraged. And what you are doing, talking about Gotion and other matters, is really important because every American must now pay attention because this is our country. We've got the votes. Together, we are stronger than corporate interests and the interests supporting the Communist Party. We can do this, and we can do this if we speak out like you've been doing. So I applaud your efforts in this regard.
Well, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to have you on my show, and I appreciate your being a hawk about China. We need people that have specific knowledge and to be able to impart that to others as well. So I just want to thank you so much for giving us the time today to talk about this issue. And hopefully I'll have you back on, and I'd love to have you out for a No Gotion rally or symposium or whatever, so you can talk directly to the people. That would be terrific. They are trying to plan a congressional roundtable hearing in Kankakee, Illinois. And I just want to let you know, these citizens are fighting back. They have raised nearly $80,000 for their own legal complaint against Gotion and the Village of Manteno for improper zoning, environmental concerns, and national security concerns. So I just want you to know that you've got middle-class American citizens just fighting back in every chance they can. So if we could get you out there to rally the troops, I would.
Lydia and I would love to do it. We'll hop in our car. We only live in New Jersey, so it's not that far away, Jeannie.
No, it's not. No.
And we're used to going and talking to people because this is our country and we have no place else to go.
That's right. Okay, well, thank you again very much for your time today. And that is A Real Story with Jeanne Ives. We'll be right back with my Watchdog segment.